Come on, sing with me. Perfect harmony. If you believe with me, we can do it together. We can take this world and make it better. Stand side by side through stormy weather. We can make a change that will last forever. If you believe with me, we can do it together. We can take this world and make it better. Standing side by side through stormy weather. We can make a change that will last forever. If you believe with me, we can do it together. We can take this world and make it better. Standing side by side through stormy weather. We can make a change that will last forever. If you're with me, we can do it together. We can take this world and make it better. Standing side by side through stormy weather. We can make a change that will last forever.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Codrington's College webinar on Knowing God Theology as a Path to the Divine. My name is Leandra Lewis. I am the Diocesan Youth Director for the Diocese of Northeastern Caribbean and Aruba, and I will be your moderator for this evening. Tonight, we have 4 panelists with us who will be presenting. But before we get to that, let us take care of some housekeeping matters. We ask that all your mics be muted and your video cameras turned off. If you have a question that you need to ask during the presentations, we ask that you use the question and answer option at the bottom of your screen and write your questions there so we can see them as opposed to placing them in the general chat. Or you can raise your hand. So with that in mind, we will begin, and each of our presenters will have a time limit of 5 minutes to speak, and then afterwards we will have a general discussion after the presentations. Presenters will have a time limit of 5 minutes to speak, and then... Was someone mic on? Okay. So our first speaker this evening is Kadisha Smart from the Diocese of the Windward Islands. And she is a resident or a citizen of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Kadisha is in her 2nd year at Codrington College, pursuing a bachelor degree in theology in the hopes of becoming an ordained minister. She currently holds an associate degree in nursing and is a qualified registered nurse. It is her hope that by combining these both degrees that she will be able to care for God's people in body, mind, and spirit. Her exposure to university education over the past year has caused her to open her vista, therefore allowing her to embrace life to the fullest and to make every moment count. This has created in her an enthusiastic spirit to be as adventurous as she can. So we now welcome Miss Kadisha Smart to make her presentation.
Thank you, Leandra. Good evening, and thank you for joining the presentation. From a young age, I have always been involved in church, from being an altar server to youth leader, member of the youth choir, Sunday school teacher, etc. I also found something to be involved in at church all the time, and I always felt the need to expand my knowledge about God, who God is, and to develop a deeper spiritual walk with Him. For many years, I did not recognize that God was calling me to ministry, but my parish priest recognized my call and planted the seed of ministry in my mind. However, I received that call when I was in high school, sitting in church one Sunday morning and hearing the voice exclaim 3 times, "You're going to be a priest." I ignored that call, however, and instead decided to pursue a career in the nursing field. One might ask why I switched from a perfectly good career to one very very few people choose to follow. However, I recognize the importance of following a path that enhances our purpose, and I felt God's call to do His work in the world, especially when the church is at the stage in its life where there's a shortage of priests in my diocese. Ministry is a calling of God. I see this as a call to use the skills God has given me and the knowledge I gain in nursing eventually, which will help me to shepherd and to guide His people who will be committed to my care into a closer walk with Him. So I answered that call to test my vocation in 2018, embarking on my journey to study theology, trusting that over the time I will come to a fuller understanding of God's purpose for me. Studying theology and being on the spiritual path, firstly, has helped me to increase my understanding of God, and secondly, has caused me to be more rooted in my faith. So far, it has clarified some of the complicated questions I have about God and my faith, and still have a lot to learn. Although the transition from nursing to theology has not been that drastic a change, it has been at times somewhat challenging and scary. Being in nursing caused me to interact with people from various backgrounds and walks of life, including persons from different faith groups. Studying theology and engaging in courses such as comparative religion has helped me and will continue to help me to be able to further and more deeply interact with persons from other faith groups, having gained a better understanding of the various beliefs. Within the field of nursing and the wider medical field, we mostly focus on the physical and mental states of individuals. Often, the spiritual aspects of persons' lives is ignored. This is unfortunate, and in my opinion, this aspect of the individual's life should be included in the World Health Organization definition of health. In nursing, I recognize to a certain extent that a person's spiritual journey is important, but it was only when I took the course Pastoral Care and Counseling that I fully realized how important it was. This course covers all aspects of an individual's life. For example, whereas in nursing we focus on the physical and getting a dying patient comfortable before death, theology has taught me that offering prayers, being a source of support to them and their families, being a mediator between family members who may not have spoken to each other in years, or even just being present with the family during one of the most difficult times in their lives, bring more comfort than anything else. Because we all know no matter how much we try to comfort a person, no matter what we say to them, we can never find the right words. Just being present at that time and in that place does more good than any words may possibly can. Most importantly, studying theology and being on this journey has helped me to grow and mature personally and spiritually. Being on this journey of discovering God, who He is, and all He entails, has also put me on a path of self discovery. Discovering who I am, who God has called me to be, and why He has called me into being has been one of the most important accomplishments thus far. It is only by discovering who I am that I, in turn, can truly discover who God is. Because of my experience, I will encourage young persons to travel the spiritual path. Discovering the best version of who God has called you to be is an incredible experience. I also remember the quote by Saint Catherine of Siena: "If you are what you should be, you will set the whole world ablaze." What we should be and who we should be is exactly what God has called us to be. Therefore, we should seek that and nothing more. Studying theology is worthwhile, and it does not only target persons who are interested in pursuing a career in priesthood. The term ministry is very broad, and the knowledge and skills acquired can be used in any career one chooses and can help in every aspect of one's life. Being at college and engaging in studies can be a bit tedious at times, and persons often use different ways to escape and cope. I find different activities across Barbados that has helped me on this spiritual journey. I usually attend to activities that has helped to foster my growth, one being an early morning sunrise meditation, and the second a spirituality group that meets every other Saturday to discuss various religious books. Both groups engage in some form of meditation or the other, either by doing the practice of Lectio Divina, which are sacred readings of scriptures where one reads, reflects, responds, and then rests. There's also centering prayer, where we use a sacred word, one only when one thoughts may be distracted to help bring about some sort of focus. For example, I usually just repeat Jesus' name over and over again. There is concentration meditation. This is where person repeats a word or phrase constantly like a mantra. I tend to use this one a lot, mostly for daily meditation, especially when I'm not in such a good place, or as the young people would say, when I'm moody. And then there is mindfulness, which basically is seeking to be present in the now. However, one should note that these practices takes years to develop, but once engaged in and the practice is done with purpose, one will be able to note the benefits it brings about. Also, being able to explore different persons of faith, such as Teresa of Avila, St. Francis of Assisi, Catherine of Siena, and many more, can also have a great influence on one's journey. Sometimes we know we wonder how we get a certain situation dealt with or different aspects of ministry. But when we look back on the lives of those saints, the answers are basically there. This is this is only the beginning of my journey, and I can say that reading about the lives of the saints have helped me a great deal thus far. So, as we take our spiritual journey seriously and set out, as St. Anselm states, faith seeking understanding, having the tools, theological inquiry can play a vital part in deepening that search. The spiritual path is a beautiful one, and it is for all of us. We must give ourselves the greatest opportunity to grow in this time. These are different times, and they require much more than what our forebears required. The world is vastly different place. So I encourage you to remember the prophet Elijah when he had run off, and coming into hiding, God met and challenged him and said, "Get up, eat, for the journey will be too much for you." And we find this in 1 Kings 19:7. We need to ensure that we have the spiritual nourishment needed for this journey. So I implore you to take on the spiritual path. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khadijah, for sharing with us. That was a lot of food for thought, and we encourage you to continue your journey as you go along. Our second presenter this evening is Raymond Cummings Jr., who hails from the Diocese of Guyana and is a final year seminarian of the Codrington College. And hopefully he will be graduating this year as he awaits for his final grades. Raymond entered Codrington College in 2017 at the age of 18. Such for him was a dream being accomplished since he believes that he received the call to ministry at the young age of 10. Before coming to Codrington, Raymond was an altar server in Georgetown and Berbice and a bass chorister in the St. George's Cathedral all-males choir. Over the past 3 years as a seminarian at Codrington College, Raymond was assigned at the St. Mark's Parish Church, St. Matthias, and St. James in Holetown, Barbados, where his passion for youth ministry and music, particularly drumming, was realized. During this time, also, Raymond served the college as a as presenter for 1 year, and furthermore served on the Codrington Student Body Council as secretary and later as president and student rep. Raymond is finally also known for his love of poetry, and in 2017, he published his first poetry book online entitled Lights Out Kiskadee, a book which features over 40 poems in the nature, love, and religious genre, all written by himself. We now welcome Raymond to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Leandra. So if I may share now, theology for me has been very empowering and enlightening. I say this because it has helped me and furthermore encouraged me in my journey, my Christian character, my walk in life, and especially my call to the priesthood. Before coming to Codrington College, as a student of the Bishop's High, my major was sociology, and I took particular interest in one of the terminologies or the theories, which was secularization. Now, many of you probably know about secularization. You know, it speaks to when things sacred and religious or mysterious things in a society begins to lose significance for persons in that said society. Now, with theology, theology furthermore bridged, I could say, a missing link in my life to who I am. Especially, we look at ourselves in the Caribbean context and our post-colonial history, or history of enslavement. You know, when we look at what happened to the Africans, for me, theology has, been empowering. It has, helped me in studying scripture, in studying the history, in studying systematic theology. It has pretty much put me in a position and a place in life to now sit and, have a sort of tolerance and have an understanding of how society is, why society is the way it is, and, furthermore, as I would have mentioned earlier, who I am and, where I sit in society. Now, for many young people, I know many young people are looking at this Zoom webinar, but, one thing you can notice on social media nowadays is the heightened presence of, I don't want to say antichrist groups. And I'm not saying antichrist groups in that they're satanic, but it has become a trend, to mock Christians, to mock Christianity, because, it is the belief that, we don't know what we're doing, and, that for the most part, we're brainwashed, and, things like that is all over the media. And even in groups where it is not Christian focused, in simple groups, you would find groups with many things, groups about the Avatar, groups about, shockingly, SpongeBob. They make all these memes, and, they would, make some fun of scripture or make some fun of some culture where they believe that we have been brainwashed. But what I could say for me, being a young Christian and on social media and studying theology, it has taken me, through some levels in my life. I can remember at one point being very discouraged and annoyed at seeing some of those things on social media, and it would really affect me. And, it would, pretty much push me to reply to persons or, say something, try to explain, try to be like an apologist. But then, after my encounter with, studying theology, especially at the academic level, which Cardington College offers, it has put me in that place to sit and reflect on the things that people see um, Christians do, the things Christians, by no fault of theirs, but because of our history and because of our high presence in society, the things that we have been doing that persons are looking at us, and the things that persons are being discouraged at, and furthermore making them, want to mock us, and feeling, that it is funny to do certain of these things. But with theology, it has made me, more contemplative, to sit and realize where these persons are coming from. And might I say, after, being introduced to such, theology, historical, systematic, I was able to sit and reflect and, just let it pass. But not let it pass as in I'm ignoring it, but, let it pass as I see it, I reflect on it, and maybe this is not my time, my time to comment on such. Maybe this is not my time to minister in this area, but to, be aware of what persons are saying, what persons are thinking, and sort of more, and furthermore, not to use my theology as a weapon, because we, I mean, theology is very empowering, as I would have mentioned earlier. And in studying theology, you'd be exposed to so many areas in life. In early civilization, theology was known as the queen of sciences. And, persons would literally sit and think and come up with theories, and furthermore use scripture, use their history, use their understandings to furthermore shape what we have today. So it was referred to as the queen of sciences. Now, having an understanding of such, being exposed to such, it makes you a very reflective and a contemplative person. It also makes you a person who is, very much, I could say, aligned with, what happens in society. And, as I would have mentioned earlier, studying theology, it pretty much brought me back to, where I was before Cardington College when I was majoring in sociology. And I came across, the term of secularization. In secularization, there are three levels, and that first level speaks to a society where, religion and things that are mysterious or the supernatural, they inform every mean of society. So, where the rain falls, it must be some sign from God, or, in such manner, everything natural was related to the supernaturals and all that. This is what is the first level of secularization. The second level now speaks to a society where science has been introduced and is now causing a breakdown of such supernatural and, such superstitions in society for the members. And then finally, there is that level which speaks to, shockingly, it's a level which speaks of religion and mysticism, or, religion being totally ruled out by science. And, it was very discouraging for me at first to, come across such a theory, and having studying it, realizing that, this is kind of the way where it seems that our society is going. We see daily, well, not during this COVID period, but our churches, the congregation sizes, are on the decline, and it is a bit troubling. But with theology, studying theology has pushed me into contemplation. And in my mind, if I had continued sociology, but, after my theological studies, I believe that, I probably would have wrote a thesis on, an added fourth stage of secularization, which I believe is very true and is possibly where our society is heading. A level where, there is science and there is religion. There is science and there is that mysticism. There's science and there is that superstition. However, it is I don't want to say pure, but that is the best word I can use. A religion and a superstition that is pure, that is, that has shed, a religion that has shed all the bad factors of history. As I would have mentioned earlier, we have, we live in a post-colonial, in this post-colonial era, in this, after slavery, we look at our world, and, as I would have mentioned, many of the memes on Facebook, they speak of us being brainwashed, because, we were taken from Africa, and here we are now, in this day and age, worshiping Jesus, which is claimed that it was not our first religion. But with theology, you can, be exposed to such as African religions. And in studying the African religions, we see their growth and their progression. And we even see and study the influences of the African religion and the African culture as we could say, traveled into this particular part of the world. We look at things like Santeria, which pretty much is a syncretism of of the Catholic religion and African Nigerian traditions, all mixed together. So this is my belief, and such has been shaped, after studying theology. It has put me on that position to, see that, all hope is not lost, but that there is going to be a point in time where, a sad point in time where we might face a drastic decline in our church's presence in society, but to hold the faith that, such will see a shedding off of all, the bad influences of, the bad influences of history, and, a kind of rebirth to a new or a better refined version of what we believe and what we hold as our faith. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Raymond. I am sure that we will have some very fruitful discussion at the end of this with everything that you have just presented here. I have a few questions myself, so I look forward to having this discussion with you later on. Our third speaker this evening is Miss Kristen Lynch, who is a third-year student at the University of the West Indies pursuing a bachelor's degree in theology with a minor in education. Kristen has served the Roman Catholic Church in various capacities, including being a catechist for over 5 years, and has served in youth ministry as youth representative of the Bridgetown Diocese, a youth group coordinator, and a St. Vincent de Paul youth representative. Kristen is a passionate advocate for Christian education and teaches religious education at the Ursuline Convent School. Please welcome Kristen.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you for that welcoming. How do I explain my journey with theology? From the age of 18 to 19, I felt this deep burning and passion within me to know and seek God more. At this age, I knew it was time to start pursuing a career path because I had not too long finished off secondary school, and I took a gap year, two gap years, because I wanted to go against the norm of giving into peer pressure, basically. Well, I know that most of you, I'm sure some of you might be around the same age that I was, 19, 18. Around that time, many people seem to think that they have their lives together. It seemed as though, and for me at that time, it seemed as though everyone had everything planned out well. My friends around me, they were going to community college or they were going to the university to either pursue a degree in accounting or biochemistry, you know, the usual, and anything that would give them a great sum of income. So, but, and I also, I almost gave in to that temptation, and I entertained the thought of pursuing a degree in biology, but I always, like I said, I always had this longing to know and seek God more. So I wanted to be, when I thought of a career path, I thought of God. I wanted him to be in every aspect of my life. I'm not saying that you can, I believe that you can change any, I believe that you can change any profession into a vocation. You can offer it to God, but I really wanted God to be in every aspect. I wanted to enjoy what career path I chose. So, like I said, around this time, I took about 2 gap years until I decided what I really wanted to do. And during that time, I sought God. I devoted myself to the church. I volunteered, and I read my Bible. I just wanted to do anything that could possibly help me get closer to God. Now, it was in doing so that everything started to unfold. God revealed to me my purpose and his plan for my life. During that time and seeking God, I reconnected with one of the sisters from my secondary school, and she became my spiritual advisor. Knowing that the only thing that I was passionate about really and truthfully was God, she encouraged me to pursue a degree in theology. Now, I did my own research about theology, and I really thought it was perfect for me. And it is still perfect for me, don't get me wrong. But I can tell you for sure, when I first started off in my first year, it was certainly not what I expected. I would say that I exceeded my expectations, actually. And theology, well, my first year was a bit challenging, and it still is challenging because, you know, theology is like any other degree, but I still do not regret what I've done, what I've chosen. So when I started, it was when I started off my second year that I truly developed an understanding for the degree that I was pursuing, and I understood why theology truly is important for any Christian, for a Christian to learn and study. Now, for example, studying courses like systematic theology, which you would have heard from Raymond before, has taught me a great deal about certain doctrines and Christian teachings and how they were developed. And to be truthful, to tell you the truth, I did not know that these doctrines did not always exist, like the doctrine of the Trinity, you know, that only came about from a controversy. No one, I didn't know that and I, like I said, I read my Bible and I did everything that I thought I needed to do. Learning a course like systematic theology helps you to defend your faith. Some people may approach you and question you about the divinity of Christ or the doctrine of the Trinity. Is Jesus really God? Is he the same substance as God, the Father? Would you be able, as a Christian, would you be able to answer that question? And those are things that you need to be prepared for. A course like this studies these types of heresies where people deny the divinity of Christ. And we Christians, we need to be always prepared to defend what we profess to believe in. Studying theology is like equipping yourself with the armor to defend our faith against false teaching. So it was so important in studying a course like this. But sometimes it's not only about defending our faith. Theology is not only limited to Christianity, it also explores other faiths and their impact on society. So that leads me to another course that had an impact on my life, and this is comparative religion, which Kadisha would have mentioned before. As a Christian, learning and educating ourselves about different faiths helps us to develop an understanding and an appreciation for other cultures and their beliefs, especially in a time like this where there are so many misconceptions about other people and what they practice and what they believe in. I think learning something like this clears the air and helps you to have develop more of respect for others, and developing this sense of appreciation as a Christian is crucial because we are called to love one another. And this course certainly helps. As a religious education teacher, I would say it was not only until I learned this course, well, obviously, I always had that appreciation and respect for others because that is the greatest commandment of them all. But it was only after I did this course that I really and truthfully developed that respect. And after I did that, I found that I was more able to effectively teach as a religious education teacher. Now I can teach my students how to respect others for who they are and for their differences and so on, and how to love others. And in doing so, I make a contribution to the world. I fulfill the mission of the gospel. So if you're interested in theology, if you're interested in pursuing your calling, if you feel that passion like I did, I really encourage you to answer it, even if you don't want to become a minister or a priest. I'm not That's not my calling. My calling is to be a Christian and a religious educator. And I feel, and I just as the just as a priest would have a particular calling, you can still do God's will. And I really and truthfully believe that studying theology has assisted me with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And we now go to our final presenter this evening. Reverend Ruel Strachan II is currently the Assistant Curate at St. Agnes Anglican Church, Grantstown, New Providence, Bahamas. He was a graduate of the Codrington College in the 2015 matriculation class. Let us welcome Reverend Strachan.
Thank you so much for having me. I think where I would begin to talk about my engagement with theological education and my personal journey with that would be my parish church in the Bahamas, my home church where I grew up. I grew up with a priest who was very passionate about theological education, one who in his own journey had reached sort of the height of theological education from an academic perspective, but who still sought to educate himself, and who still sought to learn. And as young altar servers, he always encouraged us to seek to always better ourselves in terms of theological education, particularly for those of us who felt the call to priesthood. He's drilled it in us that this call must also be met with that desire to engage theologically. And so I had that sort of foundation, and coming to Codrington College in 2015, it was a very exciting time for me, but also a time of sort of being reinforced with what I had learned from my parish priest all of those years ago. I remembered when in the early days of my time at Codrington, when the former Archbishop of the province, Archbishop Holder, would come and would speak to the seminarians, and either in his sermons or in some other forum, he always told us that in our pursuit of theological education, we must always leave the classroom, always leave the lecture room, always leave our studies, and ultimately leave the college when it's our time to go with more questions than answers. And that is something that I've pondered long and hard through my time and reflected on a lot in my time at Codrington, to think about what are the questions that I should be asking, and what are what are the more questions that I have. And for me, that has stirred up in me a curiosity or a desire, a healthy desire to investigate. And I think one of the things that theological education has taught me in my own journey, one of my contemporaries at Codrington would always speak about the sort of Caribbean context, and certainly the Bahamian context from which we came, and how it was so ingrained in us as children in school not to ask questions, not to, well, to ask questions, but not really to ask questions that challenge. And here it is, we come to Codrington, and that's really what the process of theological education was asking us to do. It was asking us to ask the challenging questions, not only to ask the questions that challenge others, but to ask the questions that challenge ourselves, that actually plunge us deeper and deeper in our knowledge of God, rooting us in faith, but also plunging us deeper and deeper into seeking and searching, and into truly finding out not only more about God, but more about ourselves as well. And so for me, that enabled me to journey through seminary and through this process of theological education, um, understanding that the questions that I have don't necessarily arise from a place of doubt, while at times doubt does exist, but it arises more from a place of wanting to understand, that desire to understand. The faith that I grew up with, that was preserved by those who came before me and that was handed on to me, that faith which I grew up with, I must now, being grounded in that, also have the desire to investigate, to ask the questions, so that I may grow in that faith. And so for me, that was one of the things that theological education really showed me the power of that. And also the capacity to disagree well, to understand that, to be engaged in theological education, um, and to be engaged in this process of asking questions, especially asking the challenging questions, may oftentimes mean that it brings one into a place of disagreement with others. But it has taught me that there is nothing wrong with disagreeing. There's nothing wrong with disagreeing with a certain point, or nothing wrong with disagreeing on the spectrum of theology. But there is something wrong with disagreeing in a sort of vengeful and awful way. But there's nothing wrong with disagreeing well. And oftentimes the questions that we have about God and about the world and about theology and our engagement with it brings us to a place where we do ask those challenging questions that may bring us into disagreement. And for me, theological education has um, helped me to see that the disagreement isn't something that I should fear. And I would add to that, I had the opportunity while at Codrington to write a thesis, which for me was a real joy and a real opportunity. It was a lot of work, but at the same time, it was an opportunity that was provided to me through being engaged in this process of theological education to actually contribute something to my context and my society. And I looked at something very cultural in the Bahamas, our cultural festival, Junkanoo, and tried to relate that to and explore that within the lens of liberation theology, or what may be more appropriate in the Caribbean or in the West Indies as emancipatory theology, and to look at that and to connect what I've grown up with culturally with the faith that I hold, as well as to bring that into the realm of theological education, for me was a real joy. But to also contribute something to theological education in my own context, and to feel comfortable enough to contribute it, understanding that there will be many questions that people have about what I have written or what I've said, and that isn't something that I should be afraid of. That is actually something that I should engage and seek to understand. And after leaving Codrington, I went to the community of St. Anselm, which for me uh, really helped to show me how much of an immediate impact theological education could have on one's life. I I left I left Codrington and went to St. Anselm in the UK, where there was a there was a component of theological education, but it wasn't in the sense that we were writing papers or studying for exams. And so for me, it was a different environment of theological education, but I almost immediately saw the impact that it had, where I one of my brothers would often ask, he would ask, how is it that I could sit through so much that he personally knows that I disagree with, and I could sit through it with a calm and a straight face, and not feel necessarily bothered by it. And I really tried to go out of my way to explain to him that for me, it was being engaged in the process of theological education is really seeking to understand more about God, and to understand more about myself, but also to understand more about other people, how they relate to God and their understanding of God and their experience of God, and how that connects with what some of the things I feel and see and say, and some of the things that I've studied. How does that connect? And to be able to ask the questions, and to be able to receive questions, not feeling that someone is necessarily trying to interrogate me, or not automatically jumping on the defensive, but really trying to understand the place from which people come, and also to be mindful of the place from which I have come, and how I engage with that. And so for me, I think the process of theological education, of being engaged in theological education, the academic discipline, for me was something that has really enriched my life, and also it's one that I don't see separate and apart from a spiritual journey. I see it as very much connected, um, to my own personal and spiritual journey. The reality that you know the faith that I hold, that has been preserved and handed on to me, I now try to connect with, with the academic discipline of theology. And for me, it really speaks towards the power, um, of having that capacity to have an intelligent faith, a faith that is informed, and a faith that seeks to inform others, and at the same time that is deeply rooted in God. And so for me, that capacity to have an intelligent faith is something that really stuck out, in my time in Codrington, and is still very much a part of my life, being um, involved in active ministry and engaged in active ministry here in the Bahamas, at St. Agnes, and to be able to receive the questions, but also to be able to go out and to live it, to live this desire, this pursuit, um, of learning more about God, learning more about oneself, um, and at the same time going deeper and deeper, being rooted in God. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Ruel. In your introduction earlier, I forgot to mention that you were also the former Codrington College Student Body President for 2016 to 2018, and also the Community of St. Anselm Residential Member, fourth cohort from 2018 to 2019. We have now come to the end of our presentations. We are now opening up for questions and answer. So if you have a question that you would like our panelists to answer, we invite you now to put your questions inside of the question and answer chat. I have one here already to our panelists. How has your pursuit of a theological education informed and influenced your understanding of God? And how does this understanding shape your approach to ministry? How has your pursuit of a theological education informed and influenced your understanding of God? And how does this understanding shape your approach to ministry? Who wants to go first?
I'll take it first.
Okay.
I I think for me, it how it has influenced my understanding of God is that being engaged in theological education at the level that I have has helped me to think um, about God beyond the categories, beyond my own small categories. And I guess one of the examples that I would give of it is uh, one of my favorite text to look at um, in my time at Codrington and even now was the Gospel according to St. John, because challenges it challenges the individual to think so big when thinking about God in terms of John says this is for the whole world. When we think about God, when you think about God's love, and when we think about that being shared, and when we think about the nature of that, it is for the whole world, for the whole universe. And so often, I think in the way that we've been conditioned, or in the way that we've learned and we've come up, we've really been so conditioned in a sense to fit God into our small categories. And for me, that process of theological education has showed me that God is much bigger and much more outside of the small box that sometimes I place him in. And in terms of that impacting my ministry, I would say, the ministry that I've been called to, and that God's blessed me to share in, I think I would say that it has helped me to look not only at the world but people around me, as well as to look at myself through a different lens, to understand that as far as I come, I still, have the questions to ask. As I said earlier, I still have the questions to ask. I still have this journey of faith and of understanding more and more about God, and to understand that the more that I understand, it doesn't mean that I've arrived or that I've come to a place where I know all that there is to know about God. But rather that I've come to a place where I've wrestled with some of the challenging questions, and out of that I've brought perhaps a message that enriches the lives of people, and a message that enriches my own life.
Thank you, Reverend Ruel. Do any of our panelists or other panelists would like to respond to the question?
I can. In Guyana, from my situation, we are a very multiracial society. We have the largest wooden church, one of the largest mosques, and largest temple in the hemisphere. So that speaks, volumes to our religious, our population's religious makeup. In studying the educational component of, well, in going in depth with our academic studies in theology, it has helped me to embrace a true reality of how big God is. I remember, I believe it was in my first year, the principal, recommending us to read a book, How Big is Your God? And in reading that book, it really opened my eyes as to, how big God was. That, God is not to be limited. He is not to be placed in this box. I'm an Anglican, so my way of worshiping God and my way of understanding God is right. Or, someone being Catholic, they have, that kind of understanding. So that is what God is. Or even in an instance, God is not, there's not a separate God for Anglicanism. There's not a separate God for Catholicism, a separate God for Islam, and a separate God for Hinduism. But rather that God, He is bigger than that. He is more than that. I've embraced a theology of God, which has me, it pretty much has helped me to go beyond, um, what I have been offered, and to pretty much do very much serious contemplation on how God works in a society and how people view Him. So for me in my ministry, as I mentioned, Guyana being very multi-religious, it should help me and it will help me to be more tolerable to those my Hindu brothers and sisters, my Islamic brothers and sisters who worship God in a different according to a different culture and according to a different context, if we may. Thanks.
Thank you, Raymond. Um, Earlier in your presentation, you spoke of how society has influenced a lot of things that are going on today. Um, and a lot of the antichrist, well, the agnostic groups have now become a little bit more empowered and powerful through social media in trying to disprove or to discredit everything that we would have learned through Christianity growing up. So how do you think these agnostic groups have affected the desire of our young people to live a Christian life?
Well, I can say how they have affected young people is that, well, it is not, young people are, you could say the highest populace on the social media, especially Facebook. And, if we look at, the makeup of our churches, we see that, well, I'm speaking specifically on, the Anglican churches and a bit on the Catholic churches as I look around. And, there is the presence of more elderly folk than young people. Now, growing up, and, in my high school days, in my college days, having interactions with many young people, I realized that they are more or less searching and seeking for something. And, as it is with knowledge, as empowering as knowledge is, it is very easy to just give up on something, to just rule out something because, it is, it doesn't make, it doesn't give a proper rationale. So this is what I've been seeing, on Facebook. So this is how, by the use of media, it's probably not even intentional, but, it is in making these jokes that our young people seeing this, probably saving it, probably sharing it, liking it, you know, all of that, builds and shapes, what goes on in our minds, what goes on in our, in our heads about, our whole understanding of God, our understanding of Scripture, and our understanding of theology. So it is that way, because of the far reach of social media, and the fact that young people, and we are at that age, where you are not, I don't want to say, where we're not certain, of a direct path to whatever it is that we're looking for, but it is easy to give up and let loose on something that would have to take something that you'd have to go beyond the rational, beyond the intellect to pursue. So it is in that way that I believe that many of those groups and such memes and all of that influence our young people's minds, and pretty much make it easy and comfortable for them to reject any subscriptions to religion, or even shy away from discussions about God and so forth. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. You have, but then now there's a follow-up, and now this is going to be directed to Kristen, because you're doing a degree in theology with education. So how do you propose you use your education aspect to engage our youth, to encourage them to be able to decipher all what has been placed on social media about Christianity, about God? How do we engage them? How do we have that conversation? What are some of the important things that we need to emphasize to them to ensure that they're able to discern what is credible from what is not credible being placed on social media?
Yes. So that's a beautiful question you posed. As we are here tonight on this webinar, I believe it is on pretty much on a basis like this, tuning in to established institutions, getting credible sources. I don't want to say that I don't think there are much credible sources on Facebook as to what is posted, but there are, maybe you can follow a few groups on Facebook, but what I see on Facebook is not more of a teaching component that happens through the sphere of the churches, but rather you would see them live streaming masses or live streaming devotions, but there is hardly any teaching component. But this is where Codrington College comes into play. Codrington College, because of COVID, now we're moving pretty much more online, because you can get a diploma online from Codrington College. And, it is with such, subscribing to, Codrington College and, furthering your theology in a credible university, a credible theological university, you can be able to, pretty much zone into what is, not what is right, but uh, what is credible. Because I mean, there's a lot of information about, there's a lot of theology you can find on the internet. I would put it as this, if you're looking at any outer space movies, you'd see the astronauts, you know, losing off from, leaving, going into space. They have this attachment rope attached to themselves, or I should say a link attached to the space, to the jet or the ship, and they're projected out, and we could see that space is there. That is how wide theology is. So it can go in that direction, but that link is what I could say that it's a credible link. It's a link that keeps you intact. It's a link that keeps you connected to what has been debated, to what has been proved credible. So it is on the part of the person themselves, the young people themselves, to ask questions, as Real would have mentioned in his presentation. Ask questions and be so guided accordingly to finding credible sources. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Kristen, would you like to add to that?
Yes. Well, I see a question here asking about, well, not necessarily to what Raymond addressed just now, but I see a question here asking me about, well, basically, they're constantly told that if they study theology, they're hardly ever told that, you know, studying that the mission, sorry, that the calling may not only be about priesthood, but it may be another calling. So I would like to address that. I'm not quite sure about what they mean about how do you make that turn around. I would I would like for that person to perhaps reword that question. I'm not sure about what they mean. How do we make that turn around? So if it's possible. There is another part to the question. I will try to answer. About encouraging theology. I am not here to say that I'm not here to say that if your calling isn't priesthood, that it may be religious education. I'm not here to say that. I believe that God has given us each and every one of us unique gifts, and my gift is to interact with younger people. I find that I do that I do that well, and especially as a young teacher, I find that I make more of an impact on the student because of my youth, because I can relate to them much better. Relating to what Raymond would have just addressed, how do you help a student differentiate what is credible from what is not credible? I would like to first say that when I'm teaching a student, I don't teach them, I before teaching a student, I teach them by the way that I carry myself as a Christian. The way that I interact with those students, I do it on a personal level. That personal level is obviously professional, but I show them who I truly am as a Christian, and they see God through me. So that first, I would say that that is one of the most effective ways of living out the gospel and showing them what the truth is. Many times I have had class discussions where students would bring up strange things that they've heard on the internet, and it becomes a whole class debate. But at the end of the day, I encourage them to read scripture for themselves. I encourage them to, well, first thing first, like Raymond would have said, you cannot take anything on the internet and you know, suck it up like a sponge. You can't take in every single thing. So I encourage them to always look at the source, see if this person has some type of bias against the particular religion, and so on. So I ask them questions. I don't just let them know, you know, well, the Bible says this or the Bible says that. I lead them down the line of questioning. I would like not to say that I use logic, but I also try to approach it from a personal standpoint. I try to help them think about their own relationship with Christ. Many of them have already been influenced by Christianity. As you know, Barbados, the majority of persons in Barbados, they're Christians. Many of us have grown up in Barbadian households. So many of them already have that Christian background. But to say that they're really Christians, you know, that's a different thing. But so I encourage, but they do have that Christian background, and many of them have experienced God already. So I encourage them to think about their experiences. And when they think about their experiences and compare it to what this person may be saying, it shows them that, you know, this could not possibly make sense. I don't know if I've answered that question well enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. We have another question here. Is there anybody else that's going to respond? No? All right. Has theological...
Yes, I
Who's that?
would.
Ruel?
Yes, I think I maybe just want to talk a bit about I think the question about theology in relation to priesthood, and oftentimes the feeling that that is the the only way, or that an interest in theology automatically means that one is called to be a priest. I think for me, it's theological education is so important, not just for those who may feel a call to priesthood, but I think for every Christian. And for me, I think it actually does a lot, that we have more and more lay people who come to a certain level of theological education, where they're able to truly engage the clergy, and where they too ask the challenging questions, that oftentimes could keep a lot of clergy, on their toes. One of the sort of laments, or one of the sad realities about a lot of cases of when people, particularly clergy, get engaged in ministry, is that there's so little reading, and there's so little questions being asked anymore, because they're sort of out of that environment of the day-to-day rigors of theological education. But I think it's so important, both for priests and for people, to seek the best ways possible to be engaged in theological education. And I think it must come, in certain aspects it is from the place of answering a call to priesthood, but um, answering a call to the general ministry of the church, in various areas and ways, um, could also be very, very much enhanced, by engaging in theological education. And I think as well, also particularly for those interested in ordained ministry, it is so important to have that theological foundation, is as well to have the spiritual foundation, but particularly, for example, to come to a place like Cotrington College, and to be rooted in the tradition there, not only the spiritual tradition, but the rich tradition, theological education there, and being able to benefit from that in a way that extends, to all those, whom we would serve, whether that be in ordained ministry or in lay ministry.
Thank you. The other question that we have here is, how has theological education equipped you to guide or accompany others in their spiritual journeys towards a deeper understanding and relationship with God?
Okay, I'll take this one again. Uh, I think for me, it is theological education has helped me to understand a bit better, um, the places from which questions come. Oftentimes, accompanying people spiritually, may mean that they come with questions, and they come from sometimes often a very broken place. A place that raises questions about God and about the world, um, raises some deeply challenging questions. And for me, being engaged in theological education then has meant that, um, to a certain extent, I'm equipped. I'm not afraid of the questions, um, that people have. I don't sort of shake in fear, when the questions are asked, or even think, gosh, how could someone think something, so far, out of the way, but actually to engage them. And I think particularly, more and more, I found this to be a very, very profound question, because more and more, I think what we need in our society and what we need in our world is, clergy and people who are committed to journey with one another, people who are committed to seek out spiritual accompaniers or spiritual directors or spiritual companions, to journey with them. Also, people who are committed to being that spiritual companion or that spiritual accompanier or that spiritual director, and to journey. And theological education, like I said, it places you in a position, to have an intelligent faith, to go deeper and deeper into your knowledge of God, and you find that, the deeper you go, perhaps the better you would be able to journey with people, and to assist them, in their journey. And it's not so much a matter of providing all the answers. So often now, being engaged in ordained ministry, I at times have to stop and say, well, gosh, my role here is not necessarily to provide all of the answers for people. I'm there to journey with them, to help them to understand better how the faith that they hold, connects with what they see and what they experience and what they feel, and to help them out of that, perhaps, to find find the answers, but above all, to find God, and in finding God, to continue to ask, the questions, that they have, and out of that, to sort of, enrich their lives, but not only to enrich their lives, to enrich my life and to enrich the lives of so many people around them.
All right, thank you. So we are getting ready to wrap up. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give your closing remarks, your final word and message that you would like to leave with our participants this evening. Kadisha, would you like to start? Is Kadisha with us? Yes. Okay.
Hey, I'm here. Can you just repeat for me, please? The
I
internet
was
isn't.
giving you the opportunity to wrap up, give your closing remarks or your final message that you would like to leave with the participants for this evening.
So just basically to encourage you guys to pursue a path in theology. As I said, it's worthwhile and there is lots to learn. So take on the challenge and go for it.
Thank you. Raymond?
Yes, for me, I again encourage all those who are interested or those even seeking to challenge themselves to take the opportunity being offered by Codrington, as they're moving online to, pursue and, furthermore seek a better, understanding of God, and which will help you to shape, your Christian character, which will help you to, see through a lens which pretty much makes you more, understanding and in society. Thanks.
Thank you, Raymond. Kristen?
I'd just like to encourage you, if you know that you don't necessarily have the calling to become a priest or a minister, I do encourage you, if you do know that you have that desire to seek and to know God more, and you have questions, you wonder why certain things are done the way that they're done within the church, practices and different faiths, different denominations. Just simply because you have questions and you have that desire to know more, that's enough reason to study theology. So I encourage you, even if you don't think that you have that calling to become a priest, I encourage you to just study theology. And you may find that along the way, God may reveal to you another thing, another plan for your life. And that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Reverend Ruel?
I would say, in closing, more than ever, I think our world and our society, particularly our Caribbean context, more than ever, we need people deeply rooted in God, also people whose faith is deeply informed theologically, and who out of that are able to possess that capacity for an intelligent faith. And there's no better place to be grounded and rooted in that and to go forth from with that than Codrington College. And it is an honorable and noble thing, in my opinion, to be engaged in this academic process of theological education. And so I encourage each and every one to hear what it is that God is saying, and where it is that one feels that God is calling, and to follow where God leads, and to follow being mindful that God is calling you, and that the God who called you is the God who will be with you in the midst of all of your questions, and in the midst of your pursuit of theological education.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the principal and the seminarians at the Codrington College in Barbados, I would like to thank all of you for joining us this evening to be a part of this panel presentation. And we encourage you to encourage others to take part in other sessions like these as you learn a lot about theology, about the Christian journey, about Anglicanism, about everything that you need to help you to become a very rooted individual in faith, in God, in our church's doctrine. So
Write my
with
question,
that,
write my
I would
answers
like
to
to
that now.
thank our panelists for so readily agreeing to share their journey with us this evening. And we continue to encourage you to share with others as well. And on that note, we wish you all a very pleasant evening and God bless. Good night.